Hello everyone, here we are at the start of a new month, so that means it's time to talk about what else I saw but didn't review in May. I'm going to give you a heads up right now, there are a lot of old World War II movies on this list. I mean, more than usual. Maybe because of Memorial Day, maybe not. The first movie is actually an old World War II movie. The Desert Rats, a 1953 film that stars Richard Burton as an English infantry officer who's put in charge of a battalion of Australian soldiers in North Africa, under orders to hold their position and keep Rommel and his forces from gaining access to the Suez Canal. Burton struggles with his leadership role, having to give unwelcome orders to men who resent him for being British and for being an unwanted authority figure. And when one of the men turns out to be Burton's old school teacher, who has a drinking problem and is a coward, it only adds to Burton's difficulties. Rommel is played for the second time by James Mason. I like his Rommel here. He's a little worse for wear at this point in the war, but still stubbornly boisterous. I know a couple of you were appalled when I said in my North by Northwest review recently that I wasn't a James Mason fan. You wanted me to see more of his movies. None of you mentioned this one, but I did like him in it, even though his appearances were very brief. Movie number 2 is called The Big Clock, a 1948 mystery thriller starring Ray Milland as a journalist and amateur detective of sorts, whose magazine team excels at solving missing person cases. But trouble erupts when Milland mistakenly gets mixed up with his boss's girlfriend and she ends up dead. This is a thoroughly entertaining movie with a lot of twists and a very good cast. The role of Milland's boss is played by Charles Laughton, being particularly repulsive, and often accompanied on screen by his partner in crime in this movie, played by George Macready. Woo! I suppose I'd classify this one as a somewhat noirish man-on-the-run film, but it's got a lot of quirky comedy too, and that took me by surprise. A lot of the fun comes from Elsa Lanchester, who has a supporting role as an eccentric artist and is wonderfully wacky, as she so often was. This movie might have been fairly average were it not for the more lighthearted and offbeat moments. Movie number 3 is actually a 2017 documentary, The Mothman of Point Pleasant. Remember a few months ago I went on this long spiel about wanting to see this on Amazon Prime, but when I finally had time to watch it, it wasn't free anymore, and I ended up watching the 2002 movie The Mothman Prophecies instead, which really wasn't what I was looking for. Well, this documentary is free again on Prime, so I watched it. Actually, one of you did very helpfully inform me of another documentary that was available on Prime, an episode of an American Monsters and Urban Legends series that featured the Mothman, so I watched that, I think it was last month. I enjoyed it. It was quite informative and features interviews with a mix of witnesses, aficionados, and skeptics. But I'm really happy this documentary came back on Prime, and it didn't disappoint. It's only 67 minutes long, but thorough, though it dwells a little less on certain angles than the other show did. This one describes events in a more linear fashion, including interviews with key local figures along the way, and I feel like it treats the subject matter a little more seriously. The big highlight, though, is that it includes a few animated sequences. The other program included a lot of illustrations, but the animation in this one, accompanied by old audio clips or live voiceover of eyewitnesses recounting their stories of Mothman sightings, was a really good, creepy effect. I got goosebumps. Movie number 4 is another World War II film, one of the big movies that came out late last year, Darkest Hour, about Winston Churchill's early days as Prime Minister. First of all, and probably the most obvious comment I could make, Gary Oldman's Churchill was amazing. The man is a chameleon, he's famous for it, and he does a great job with the look, the voice, the mannerisms. Oldman won the Oscar for his work on this movie, as did the hair and makeup team. But the supporting cast does an excellent job as well, and I'd say that Stephen Delane and Ben Mendelsohn, as Lord Halifax and King George VI respectively, both do accent and voice work that's almost as challenging as what was required of Oldman. I also liked the music by Dario Marianelli, and the costuming, which had nice ensembles for the women and some exquisitely tailored suits for the men. I was a little dismayed, however, to find out, after my dad looked up more info on Lord Halifax, because I was wondering what happened to him, that the film is not entirely accurate in its portrayal, that once Hitler invaded Czechoslovakia, Halifax was done with the idea of peace negotiations and broke with Neville Chamberlain. That's not how the movie portrayed it, and I don't like it when a movie based on a true story isn't content to rest on the facts and embellishes things or just straight up makes things up to create drama. And in this case, this really became the central conflict of the film. I'm trying not to let this diminish my enjoyment of the movie. I did like it, it was good, it was funny, it had some really great scenes. It's just not 100% historically accurate. But what Hollywood movie is? Movie number 5 is another World War II movie, this one from 1951, titled Halls of Montezuma, in which Richard Widmark, whose character is plagued by something called a psychological migraine, has to lead a group of Marines, consisting mostly of replacements, on a difficult Pacific Island campaign. The cast in this one is pretty good. Widmark plays the kind of character he often did, kind of cranky and unpredictable, but still likable and somehow appealing. The supporting cast includes Carl Malden, Jack Palance, Jack Webb, and Robert Wagner. Unfortunately, it is one of those war movies where it feels like half the characters die, so don't get too comfortable with them. I did think the story in the latter half got a little confusing, and my parents felt the same way. From about the halfway mark, there's a countdown to something, but none of us knew what it was, just that there were 6 hours, then 3 hours, then 40 minutes. I'm not sure if we missed something, or if they just forgot to tell us. Movie number 6 is an interesting little mystery from 1954, starring Alistair Sim, titled An Inspector Calls. This one did not turn out to be what I was expecting. Based on the title and a tiny blurb of a plot summary, I thought it was a whodunit set in a grand mansion where all the house guests and staff are suspects being questioned by a quirky policeman. It turns out this is more of a personal drama. There is a quirky policeman, played by Sim, and a murder case, but it delves more into the psychology of guilt, questions of morality, the issue of class differences. And then there's a twist at the end, which I never saw coming. It made the whole thing suddenly feel like an extended Twilight Zone episode. Very unusual. Movie number 7 is another war movie, but it's not old, and it's not World War II. This one is Lone Survivor, the 2013 movie based on the book of the same name about the SEAL team that got ambushed in the mountains of Afghanistan. It stars Mark Wahlberg doing that tough guy action hero based on true events thing that he's turned out to be pretty good at in the last few years. This is a super stressful, tense movie, and a sharp contrast from the war movies we usually watch, with the R-rated language and violence and blood and guts. There were a couple parts that were just too much for me, and I had to look away, but watching my parents' expressions when Wahlberg is pulling shrapnel out of his leg was pretty amusing. It's a very good movie. It's just rough. Movie number 8 is a silent movie from 1922, a German drama titled Phantom, about an aspiring poet whose life takes a downward turn after well, to be honest, I'm not sure which event is the catalyst. I guess it starts when he's knocked down in the street by an upper-class girl and her team of horses. He's immediately taken with her and becomes obsessed with finding her again. He desperately tries to improve his standing in life to be worthy of her, making reckless bad decisions right and left, and then he finds another girl who reminds him of her, and things just get worse from there. It's a melancholy story, on the dreary side, but it's brilliantly filmed by F.W. Murnau, and while the star, Alfred Abel, who I love as the father in Metropolis, was probably too old for this part, his tragic expression and sad eyes are still a very good match for the role. This movie boasts some impressive special effects and memorable fantasy sequences and montages, opting for a very visual way to convey emotions, and it's yet another strong example of how silent film was way ahead of its time. Movie number 9 is 2014's The Maze Runner. I stopped being interested in these young adult dystopian series things a few years ago, before this book even came out, I think. But I've heard pretty good things about this one, the first movie and the series as a whole, and since all 3 movies are out now, I thought I'd give it a shot. Turns out I liked this first one much more than I expected to, and in fact, I feel bad about some of the snarky things I might have said about it. I liked the actors for the most part, the story was paced well and got more interesting as each crazy development unfolded. I enjoyed the special effects, and it's nice to see a movie where the CGI is actually an important element that needs to be there and is well executed most of the time. And since I didn't know much of anything about the plot, finding out that it was kind of a sci-fi creature feature was a cool surprise. I was able to rent the second movie in the series, The Scorch Trials, just a week later. It's actually number 14 on the list, I think, but I'll talk about it now. I liked this one too, although I think I liked the first one better. The sequel keeps changing settings and is constantly introducing new batches of characters and hardly developing any of them, so it sprawls more. The Scorch Trials also struck me as being a little more commercialized, more custom-fit to be like other movies in the genre, with more villains, dramatic character entrances, the introduction of a possible love triangle, more chase scenes, zombie stuff, 'cause zombies are cool. I still like the kids for the most part, though in both movies I have a hard time believing that some of them are actually teenagers. They've got those tricky faces where they could pass for anywhere between 16 and 28. I mentioned there were zombies. I don't know if these infected or turned people are actually zombies, as in people who died and came back to life and want to eat you, but that's certainly what they remind me of. Anyway, that element was another fun surprise, and there was one jump scare that got me really good. I'm remaining optimistic about the third and final movie, The Death Cure, which came out recently. I've got it on hold at the library, and hopefully it will be in soon, so stay tuned for my June video to find out what I thought of that one. Movie number, 11, I've gotten confused, is E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial, the 1982 classic about the boy who befriends an alien. I've seen this one before, of course, but it's been a long time, and I wanted to check it out again, see what I thought of it as an adult. When I was little, I actually thought this movie was kinda scary. I was scared of all aliens, even if they were friendly and cute, and there were some images of E.T. I found pretty upsetting. What I realize now that I'm older is how emotional this movie is. It's a family movie, kids are the main characters, it's got a lot of humor, but it's also got a lot of sadness and heartbreak. And I don't know if I've mentioned this to you before, but the music in this movie, which is by John Williams, always makes me emotional. I'll be listening to headphones while cleaning the bathroom or something, and the bicycle chase comes on, and it's like a trigger. There's a certain point in the music where I lose it every time. It's weird. I was actually nervous about watching this movie with my parents because I know I'm prone to cry at the end, and I'm very self-conscious about crying over movies when there are other people in the room. If I'm by myself, it's fine, and I cry over everything, oh my goodness, but I don't feel comfortable doing it in front of other people, even when those other people are my own family. I will exert a ridiculous amount of self-control to keep myself from losing it, and it's probably not healthy and it would be better for me to just let it out, but I can't. I just can't do it. The other thing I discovered was how good the performances of the three main kids are. Their acting is great, all three of them. Henry Thomas, Robert McNaughton, and Drew Barrymore. I love the way each kid is affected so positively by the whole experience, and how, as siblings, they help each other and grow closer together. It's really special. And before I start crying just thinking about it, let's move on to the next movie. Movie number 12 is Chappie, the 2015 movie about a kidnapped police droid that is given a personality upgrade. I had no idea what to expect from this one. It was made by the same guy who did District 9, which I thought was a thought-provoking but disturbing movie. So I felt like anything was possible with this one. I don't think this movie has as clear a message as that one did, but it is an interesting take on artificial intelligence and consciousness, especially with its ending. The robot has very good visual effects and voice work done by Charlton Copley, which make Chappie impressively emotive and sympathetic. There are some things that don't make sense, from minor forgettable details to larger plot points, and I think the antagonists are a little on the cartoonish side. Their motivations are shallow, and there's one guy who is especially hammy, and I could never figure out why his character, and his character alone, had subtitles. I could understand him just fine. It's certain other characters I had trouble with. The last war movie this month is 1945's Back to Bataan, which portrays the recapture of the Philippines from Japanese control by U.S. and Filipino joint forces. Most of the focus is on the Filipino guerrilla fighters who are eager to take their country back. It does touch on some passive-aggressive feelings about their relationship with the United States, but since this is a wartime movie made in the spirit of collaboration, it's all mostly positive. John Wayne and Anthony Quinn star, Wayne as the American army leader in charge of organizing the resistance, and Quinn as the descendant of a Filipino hero. I liked both actors in this movie. I thought John Wayne was especially good. He seemed less John Wayne than usual, if you understand what I mean. The film uses footage of real American POWs being liberated from a POW camp, which must have been incredibly moving for those men and their families in 1945. I saw the 1943 film Bataan with Robert Taylor a number of years ago, and while I did really like it, it was kind of a downer as it depicts a heavy loss. So it was good to see the rest of the story played out here. The last movie I saw in May was the 2007 remake of 3:10 to Yuma, starring Russell Crowe and Christian Bale. I have seen the original 1957 movie with Glenn Ford and Van Heflin. I can't say I remember a whole lot about it, but I know I liked it. It was tense, and the ending was surprising. I'd say the remake adds quite a bit to the story. I especially don't remember there being a son involved, but again, don't quote me on that because I can't remember everything. I do also tend to get the original 3:10 to Yuma confused with High Noon and Act of Violence. Act of Violence isn't even a western, but it does star Van Heflin, so I guess that's why. Anyway, I liked this movie. It's well-paced and suspenseful, with good action sequences balanced against the quieter scenes. I think Russell Crowe is really well cast opposite Christian Bale. They're both intense, capable actors who are evenly matched here. Bale's character is the honest rancher who's bent on getting Crowe's notorious outlaw on the train to the Yuma prison. Crowe does have the more charismatic role, and this turns into one of those complicated situations where you're not sure what you want to happen. You root for the good guy, but you find yourself liking the bad guy a little bit more. Then you find yourself wondering if there's any possible way they can both win, and maybe even become friends. I like that the movie keeps its focus on this interesting dynamic between the two main characters and doesn't get distracted with unnecessary subplots or flashy fight scenes. It's really quite simple, and I appreciate that a lot. That's it for last month, another long movie list. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, your comments are welcome. Let me know your thoughts on any of the movies I mentioned, and I will see you again, hopefully soon. Thanks for watching!